My name is Megan Hartley. I am 34 years old. My parents found out they had a grandson through a text message I sent 4 hours after he was born. They never called back. I remember the exact time on the hospital clock. It said 6:47 in the evening. I was holding Eli against my chest, still shaking from the epidural wearing off, and I typed the words with one hand. He's here, 7 pounds 2 ounces. Everyone is healthy. I added a photo because I thought a photo might do what words couldn't. No reply came that night. None came the next morning either. By the time Eli was 3 days old, I had stopped checking my phone every hour and started checking it once before bed, out of habit more than hope. I am not going to pretend I have a clean memory of that whole week. Parts of it are a blur of fluorescent lighting and nurses checking blood pressure cuffs. But the moment I sent that text, I remember with a kind of clarity that scares me a little. My thumb on the screen, the way my hospital bracelet rubbed against my wrist when I lifted my arm, the sound of the door clicking shut as a nurse left the room. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is where we share real-life inspired tales of family conflict, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground. If these stories speak to you, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I should back up. I keep doing that lately, jumping into the middle of things and then realizing I left out the part that explains why any of it matters. So let me go back, not to the hospital, further than that. I grew up in Bowling Green, Ohio, in a house with green shutters and a mother who alphabetized her spice rack. My sister Brooke is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, Brooke was the one my mother took to pageants and dance recitals. I was the one who got handed a calculator and told to balance the church bake sale ledger at age 11. I didn't resent it back then. I want to be clear about that. I thought it was just how things were divided in our family. Brooke got the attention. I got the responsibility. It felt fair in some small, unexamined way, the way things feel fair to a child who has never seen another version of a family. My grandmother Joan lived 4 blocks from us. She was my mother's mother, and she was nothing like my mother. Joan kept a coffee can full of buttons on her windowsill. She let me sort them by color for hours and never once told me to do something more useful with my time. I need to jump ahead here because there's a piece I have to explain before the timeline makes sense. When I was 27, I got pregnant. The father was a man named Dale, who I dated for 8 months before he found out and left the state for a job in Tulsa. He sends a check every month. He has never met his son. My mother's reaction to the pregnancy is something I have replayed more times than I'd like to admit. She didn't yell. My mother has never once raised her voice at me in my entire life, and somehow that has always been worse. She sat very still at her kitchen table, the same table where I learned to do long division, and she said, "This is going to embarrass all of us." Not you, all of us. I noticed that word choice at the time, and I noticed it again years later, lying awake at 2 in the morning with Eli's monitor glowing on my nightstand. I have to jump back again just for a second because there's something from before the pregnancy that matters now in a way it didn't then. My mother was and still is on the board of the Wood County Historical Society. She is the kind of woman other women in that town call when they need a casserole recipe or a character reference. Her reputation is not a small thing to her. It is closer to a second skeleton, something holding her up from the inside. I went into labor on a Tuesday in March. I called my mother from the parking lot of Wood County Hospital before I even checked myself in because some old instinct in me still wanted her to be the first call. She picked up on the fourth ring. I could hear a hair dryer running in the background. "I'm in labor," I told her. "I think this is really it." She paused. The hair dryer kept running. Then she said, "Your father and I have the Hendersons' anniversary party tonight. Can this wait until tomorrow?" I want to tell you I had a sharp comeback. I didn't. I just said okay, the way I'd said okay to her my whole life, and hung up and walked into the hospital alone. My grandmother Joan came instead. She drove herself at 78 years old and got there 40 minutes before Eli did. She held my hand through the worst of it and never once looked at the door waiting for someone else to walk through. That's the part I sent the text about, 6:47 in the evening, no reply. I keep circling back to that text because I went looking for it. Again, not long ago on my phone. It's still there, sitting in a thread that has almost nothing else in it. I scrolled up once, out of some impulse I didn't fully understand, and found something I hadn't remembered. A message from 3 weeks before Eli was born from my mother that I had never deleted and apparently never fully processed either. It said, "I hope you've thought about what this does to this family's name in this town." I sat on my kitchen floor reading that message on a Thursday night 2 months ago with Eli already asleep upstairs, 7 years old now, his night light shaped like a moon casting a soft blue glow under his door. I didn't cry. I just felt something behind my ribs go very still, the way a room goes still right before a storm. I should explain the gap. 7 years is a long time to leave unaccounted for, and I don't want to skip over it the way my mother skips over things she doesn't want to examine. For the first 2 years after Eli was born, my mother and I existed in a kind of frozen politeness. She sent a card on his first birthday. No gift, just a card, signed by both her and my father with a generic verse about little blessings. I kept it in a drawer for a while before I threw it out. Grandma Joan filled the space where my parents weren't. She came every Sunday. She taught Eli to sort buttons by color, the same way she'd taught me, and I would watch them at her kitchen table and feel something warm and something sad sitting right next to each other in my chest. Joan died 2 years ago in October of heart failure in her sleep in the same house with the green door I used to walk to after school. I was the one who found her because I had a key and she hadn't answered her phone in 2 days. I let myself remember that morning only in pieces. The smell of her kitchen, the quiet that was wrong in a way silence usually isn't. Here's where I have to jump forward again, because the part that comes next explains almost everything that happened later, including why my mother is suddenly calling me now after 7 years of near silence. Joan left her house to me in her will, not to my mother, not split between my mother and her brother, my Uncle Pete, the way everyone assumed it would go. To me outright, along with $11,000 in a savings account and a small life insurance payout of $42,000. My mother did not take this well. I sat across from a probate attorney named Diane Castellano, no relation, in an office on Main Street with brown carpet and a ceiling fan that ticked when it spun, 6 weeks after the funeral. She slid a folder across the desk and told me the will was airtight. Joan had updated it 4 years earlier with witnesses, with a notarized signature, with no ambiguity at all. Your mother's attorney has already called my office twice, she said, adjusting her glasses with one finger. I want you to be prepared for that. I asked her what that meant for me practically. She said it meant nothing changed unless my mother wanted to spend money contesting a document that would almost certainly hold up. The legal fees alone, she estimated, would run my mother somewhere around $4,000 just to start, with no guarantee of anything different at the end. My mother did not contest the will, she did something quieter instead. She stopped speaking to me. Brooke followed her lead, the way Brooke has followed her lead since we were children. For 2 years, the only contact I had with either of them was a single text message on Eli's birthday, sent by my mother, that said happy birthday to him with no name attached. Not even a heart, just the words. I moved into Joan's house with Eli 14 months ago. I kept the button can on the windowsill exactly where it was. I sleep in the room that used to be her sewing room. I am not telling you this to make myself sound like a martyr. I am telling you because it matters for what comes next, and because I want you to understand I had made peace with this. I had stopped waiting for the phone to ring. Then 3 weeks ago it rang. I almost didn't answer. My mother's name still sits in my phone exactly as it has for 15 years, just the word mom, no photo attached because she never sent me one to use. I stood in my kitchen with a dish towel over one shoulder and let it ring twice before I picked it up. Megan, her voice sounded the same, calm, even slightly clipped at the edges. I think it's time we talked as a family. I didn't say anything for a second. The dish towel slid off my shoulder and I caught it without looking, an old reflex. About what? I said. About Eli, she said. About being part of his life. He's 7 now. That's old enough to remember things, Megan. I don't want him growing up thinking he doesn't have grandparents. I want to tell you exactly what happened in my body in that moment, because it wasn't anger, not at first. It was something colder. My stomach didn't drop so much as it went flat and quiet, the way water goes still right before it freezes. He's had grandparents for 2 years, I said. He just hasn't had you. There was a pause on the line. I heard a chair creak on her end, the kind of small domestic sound that tells you someone is settling in for a longer conversation than they let on. That's not fair, she said. Things were complicated, you know that. I almost laughed. I didn't, but the urge passed through me fast and sharp like a current. I have to go, I told her. I'll think about it. I hung up before she could answer. I stood in my kitchen for a long minute, holding my phone against my chest the way I used to hold Eli when he was small enough to fit there, and I tried to figure out what had just happened. I need to jump back one more time because I left something out, and it's the kind of thing that doesn't matter until suddenly it does. My mother's sister, my Aunt Carol, has not spoken to my mother in almost 9 years. They had a falling out over their own mother's care, years before Joan got sick, something about a power of attorney form Carol refused to sign without reading it first. I never got the full story. I only knew Carol lived 40 minutes away in Findlay, and that she sent Eli a birthday card every single year with an actual gift inside, usually books, and that she had come to Joan's funeral and sat in the back without speaking to my mother once. I called Carol the night after my mother's phone call. It was almost 10 o'clock. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd probably been waiting for someone to call about something, even if she didn't know it would be me. She called you, Carol said before I'd even gotten a full sentence out. It wasn't a question. How did you know that? I asked her. Because Brooke called me last week, Carol said. Fishing, asking if I'd talked to you lately, asking what I thought about, and I quote, mending fences. I sat down on my kitchen floor again, back against the cabinet, phone pressed to my ear. Eli's nightlight glow came faintly down the hallway behind me. Carol, I said, what is actually going on here? There was a long pause. I could hear her moving something, a drawer maybe, the scrape of wood on wood. I think you should. Come over, she said. I have some things I should have shown you a long time ago. I drove to Findlay the next afternoon while Eli was at his after-school program. Carol's house smelled like cedar and old paper, the way houses do when someone has lived in them for 30 years without changing much. She had a shoebox sitting on her kitchen table when I walked in, the lid already off like she'd been sorting through it before I arrived. Sit down, she said. She didn't sound dramatic about it. She sounded tired, the way you sound when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and you're finally about to set it down. I sat. She slid the shoebox toward me an inch at a time, the way you'd slide something across a table to a person you weren't sure wanted it. I've been saving these, she said, since the day Eli was born. Inside the box were printed screenshots, dozens of them organized in small stacks with rubber bands, dates written on sticky notes on top of each stack. I picked up the first one with hands that felt strangely far away from my body. It was a text from my mother to Carol, sent the night Eli was born. The timestamp said 9:14 in the evening, 2.5 hours after I'd sent my own text from the hospital bed. It said, tell her not to call me when she decides to ruin her life like this. I read it twice, then I set it down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something that might shatter if you're not paying attention. There's more, Carol said. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking at the box. The next one was from 4 months later. My mother to Carol again, after Carol had apparently mentioned wanting to send Eli a gift. Don't encourage her. She needs to understand actions have consequences. The one after that was from the week of Joan's funeral, sent to Brooke, not Carol, but somehow forwarded to Carol anyway, a detail I didn't ask about. If Megan tries to make a scene about the will, we are not engaging. We let the lawyers handle it and we keep our composure. I want to be honest about what I was feeling reading these. It wasn't shock, exactly. Some quiet corner of me had suspected most of this for years. It was something closer to grief, oddly specific grief, for a version of being believed that I had never actually had. Why did you keep these? I asked Carol. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. Carol finally looked up at me. She had her mother's eyes, Joan's eyes, the same pale gray-blue. Because I knew someday she'd try to come back into your life, Carol said, without ever admitting what she did, and I wanted you to have proof when that day came that you weren't imagining any of it. We sat there for a while without talking. She made tea neither of us drank. I held one of the printed pages in my lap, smoothing the corner flat with my thumb without realizing I was doing it. There's one more thing, Carol said eventually, and I think it's the real reason she's calling now. She pulled a folded section of newspaper from the bottom of the box, a clipping from the Wood County Courier dated 3 weeks earlier, a feature piece on historic homes in the area with a photo of Joan's house, my house now, on the front of the section. The caption mentioned the home's longtime owner, Joan Whitfield, and noted that the property had recently passed to a granddaughter in the family. It ran in the Sunday edition, Carol said. Your mother is on the board of the Historical Society. Half the committee reads that paper. I felt something click into place, slow and cold, like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. Have you ever had someone show up in your life only after it became inconvenient for them not to? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because what happens next is the part I've been building toward this whole time. I drove home from Carol's house with the shoebox on the passenger seat, seatbelt pulled across it like it was a person. I didn't tell Eli anything that night. I made spaghetti and listened to him talk about a kickball game at recess, and I nodded in the right places, and underneath the nodding I was doing math I didn't want to be doing. My mother had not called because 7 years had passed and her heart had softened. She had called because a newspaper photo of her late mother's house, now legally and publicly mine, had landed on the breakfast tables of every person whose opinion she'd spent her whole life curating. An estranged daughter and an unacknowledged grandson are easier to explain away when no one is looking. They are much harder to explain when the local paper puts your family's name in print. I want to pause here because I almost let myself stay angry in that one note for the rest of this story, and that would not. Be honest, anger was there. But underneath it was something quieter and worse, a kind of tired sadness that comes from understanding a person completely, all the way down, with no parts left unexplained. Brooke called 2 days later. I almost didn't pick up, but some part of me wanted to hear what version of this she'd been told. Mom says you're being difficult, Brooke said, no hello first. I could hear her adjusting something, maybe a bracelet, the small metallic click of it against a counter. Difficult how? I asked. She just wants to see Eli, Brooke said. Is that so terrible? He's her grandson. She didn't think so when he was born, I said. Brooke was quiet for a second. I heard the bracelet click again. That was a long time ago, Megan. People change. Did she tell you about the article in the Courier? I asked. The silence that followed was longer this time, long enough that I knew the answer before she gave it. That has nothing to do with this, Brooke said too fast. Okay, I said. I didn't push. I had learned a long time ago that pushing my family rarely got me anywhere they didn't already plan to go. I agreed to meet my mother for coffee the following Thursday. I chose the place, a small shop on Main Street called Tomlinson's, partly because it was neutral ground and partly because the barista, a college kid named Theo, knew me well enough to know something was wrong the moment I walked in early and sat facing the door. My mother arrived 4 minutes late, which for her is practically punctual. She was wearing a cream blazer I recognized from church, and she set her purse down on the table with a precision that told me she had rehearsed this. Thank you for coming, she said. Of course, I said. Theo brought our drinks over himself instead of calling the order, which wasn't his usual habit. He set my coffee down a little too carefully, glanced at my mother, glanced at me, and walked away without a word. I noticed it. I don't think she did. My mother wrapped both hands around her cup without drinking from it. I've been thinking about Eli a lot, she said, about what he's missing not having us around. What changed? I asked her, plain, no edge in my voice that I could hear. She blinked just slightly, the kind of blink that means a question landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. What do you mean, what changed? 7 years, I said. Nothing changed for 7 years. What changed 3 weeks ago? She set her cup down. Her fingers stayed curled around it like she needed something to hold on to. I don't know what you're implying, she said. I reached into my bag and set the newspaper clipping on the table between us. I didn't slide it toward her the way Carol had slid the shoebox toward me. I just set it down and left it there facing her. She looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked back up at me, and something in her face went very still, the careful kind of still that happens when a person is recalculating in real time. That's not why I called, she said. I didn't answer right away. In the silence, I thought, you are not even denying it well, you're not even trying. And underneath that thought was a second one, quieter and sadder. He deserves better than being a prop in your reputation. I think you should go, I said finally, quiet, not unkind, just final. Megan, her voice cracked slightly on my name, the first crack I'd heard in it in years. He's my grandson. He's 7 years old, I said. He's had a grandmother for 2 years. Her name was Joan. You weren't her, and you're not about to become her now because a newspaper printed her name. She didn't say anything else. She picked up her purse, set a $5 bill on the table for a coffee she never drank, and walked out without looking back. Theo came by a minute later to clear the cups. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at me for a second, the kind of look that says I saw enough to understand, and went back behind the counter. I sat there for a while after she left, longer than I needed to. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt the way you feel after setting down something heavy you've been carrying so long your arms have forgotten what it's like to be empty, tired, light, a little hollow in a way that wasn't entirely bad. I called Carol from the parking lot before I drove home. How did it go? She asked. She didn't deny it, I said, not really. Carol let out a breath I could hear through the phone, slow and long. I'm sorry, honey, she said. I was hoping I was wrong about the timing. You weren't wrong, I said. For what it's worth, Carol said, Joe knew exactly who she was leaving that house to and why. She told me once years ago that you were the only one in this family who never asked her for anything. I sat in my car for a long minute after we hung up, hands resting on the steering wheel, not driving anywhere yet. I thought about Joan's button can on the windowsill. I thought about the way she never once asked me to explain myself. I have to jump forward now, further than I have anywhere else in this story, because I think the ending only makes sense from a distance. Eli is 14 now. That newspaper article feels like it happened in another lifetime, though it's only been 7 years. My mother has not called again. Brooke sends a birthday text every year, the same flat happy birthday with no name attached, and I let it sit unanswered most years, though sometimes I send back a single thumbs up emoji, mostly out of habit, mostly meaning nothing. I never told Eli the full story when he was small. I told him the truth in pieces as he got old enough to ask better questions. When he was 11, he asked me directly why he didn't have a grandma and grandpa like his friends did. I told him some people aren't able to show up the way they should, and that not showing up has consequences even years later. He didn't ask much more after that. He's a thoughtful kid, the kind who sits with information instead of demanding more of it right away. He still keeps a button jar on his windowsill, the same one that used to belong to Joan, refilled now with buttons of his own choosing. Carol comes for dinner most Sundays. She taught Eli how to fix a bike chain last summer, the same patient way Joan used to teach things, no rush in it anywhere. She never brings up my mother, and neither do I. A few months ago, I found the shoebox again, pushed to the back of my closet behind a stack of winter coats. I almost hadn't looked for it. I'm not sure what made me pull it down that particular evening. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with it in my lap, the same way I'd sat on Carol's kitchen floor years before. I went through the screenshots one more time, slower this time, without the shock of the first reading to rush me past any of it. At the bottom of the box, underneath everything else, I found the hospital bracelet from the night Eli was born. I'd forgotten I'd put it there. It was thin and plastic, the kind that goes soft and pliable with age, his name and weight still printed on it in faded ink. I held it in both hands for a long time. It weighed almost nothing, the way these things always do, lighter than anything that matters. Should be allowed to weigh. I didn't cry. I just sat there in the quiet of a house that had belonged to a woman who never once made me explain myself, holding the one object that proved exactly when all of this began, and exactly who had been there and exactly who hadn't. Then I closed the lid and I put the box back where it belonged.